I welcome you all to the fourth chapter of Vistas, The Enemy by Pearl S. Buck. Let's know about her a bit before we move on. Pearl Stryker Buck was an American writer and novelist who spent her childhood in Zhenjiang, China, as Sai Zhenzu, a daughter of missionaries of Presbyterian Church. She received the Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and Nobel Prize in Literature in 1938. Let me tell you, the Pulitzer Prize are the achievements in newspapers, journals, a lot about all those. So yes, she received a prize for that. Now, before we move on, I'd just like to, recollect a little bit of the World War II with you. Now, World War II, we all know 1939 to 1945. And we had the Axis group against the Allies group. The Axis group, we had Germany, Italy and Japan, the combatants. That was one was the Axis group, the other were the Allies. In that there were n number: France, states, the United States, Greece, China, Denmark, all of them, they were there, right? So here we had Axis where we had only Germany, Italy and Japan. So now, keeping this in mind, keeping this base in mind, I shall go ahead with this chapter and you will know why I had to tell you this right away. So yeah, let's see the plot. Now, the story is set during the World War II. Dr. Sadao Hoki, a Japanese doctor, had a house on the coast. One day, an American prisoner of war shows up at his doorstep. Now, remember, he's a Japanese, he's an American. So you see, they were enemies basically. And so the name of the chapter, The Enemy. The story describes Dr. Hoki's dilemma whether he should save the wounded man, being a doctor, or should he hand over the enemy to the army, being a Japanese citizen. So you get it? This story is really beautiful, a lot of humanity in it. Yes, so keep sure, make sure that you are there with me all the time. Watching a movie is fine, but understanding it word by word along with the meanings is going to be much more interesting. So let's move on. Let's get to the characters. Dr. Sadao Oki, a Japanese doctor, studied medicine in USA. Hana, Dr. Sadao's wife, also studied in USA. Tom, an American prisoner of war, POW, found unconscious by Dr. Sadao and Hana. Yumi, nanny for Dr. Sadao's children. So let's begin. Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. So his house was somewhere near the coast. The low, square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. Pines are similar. You have those long needle-like leaves, something similar to your Christmas trees. Yeah, if you remember those leaves, something similar to that. Now, as a boy, Sadao had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. You must have come across people how they climb the trees for coconuts. So looking at them, he would do that and come across it. His father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, "Those islands yonder, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan." Now, his father would often take him, to those seas, to the islands of those seas, and he would always tell him one thing: those islands yonder. Yonder means those islands there. Like he was at one side and there he could see the island. So he would tell Sadao Hoki that those islands there, in that direction, he would point out, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan, as in these are the steps towards success. You have to, climb those steps. Where shall we step them from? Now, he was a child, and so very innocently he asked his dad, where shall we step them from? Sadao asked seriously. Who knows, his father had answered. Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it. This line means a lot even to all of us. Yes, your future is what you make out of it. So this is how he was actually guiding his son. Sadao had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. Very obedient child and a very wise one. His father, who never joked or played with him, but who spent infinite pains upon him, who was his only son. He never really joked with him or played with him, but yes, he worked very hard for him. Who spent infinite pains. He went through a lot so that he could give his son the best. Sadao was his only son, so obviously he wanted to do everything that he could to give him a bright future. Sadao knew that his education was his father's chief concern. His father was extremely worried. He wanted to make sure that he studied really, really well. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. Now, his dad wanted him to become a surgeon. So he sent him to States at the age of 22 to become a surgeon. He had come back at 30, so it took him 8 long years to become a surgeon. And before his father died, he had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist. Fortunately, his dream was to make sure that his son becomes really big. His son does something really nice. And thankfully, he actually saw his son become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist before he shut his eyes for good. Now, because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean, he had not been sent abroad with the troops. Now, it was the World War II going on. So what happened? He was not sent with the troop. Now, being a doctor, you have to be with the troop. You have to be with the army and take care of them when they are wounded. But because he was, perfecting a discovery, and what kind of discovery was he doing? He was researching on something that would clean the wounds, it would make the wounds entirely clean. He was trying to come up with something that would heal up really fast. Also, he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically, and for this possibly Sadao was being kept in Japan. Now, the old general out there of Japan, he was going through some kind of treatment, and his treatment was such that they might need to operate upon him. They might need to perform an operation, and for the reason they did not let Sadao go. He was a very good surgeon, so they kept him back. They did not let him go with the troops so that he can operate if required. So he was kept back in Japan. Clouds were rising from the ocean now. Now there is a very beautiful scene they are describing to you. So while I'm reading, while I'm explaining, let's visualize it. Let's keep, imagining that whole scene. It's really beautiful. Just go with the flow. So clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Now, he was near the coast. His house was near the coast. So, the past few days, it was pretty hot, right? It was very hot. And suddenly, there were cold waves. So, when the heat and, the coldness, when they come together, you get fog, right? We are all aware. So, this is what happened. There was a lot of fog. It was misty. It was foggy. Sadao watched Miss hide outlines of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house, wreathing around the pines. Now, what happened? You can see Sadao watched the mists. The mists are what? Clouds of water droplets, the foggy thing. Of a little island. Now, he could not see, he was on one and he could not see, generally you can see the island which is across. So, you can see one outline type of it. But the fog became so thick that gradually, even that outline, that island could not be visible. It became so thick. casual, very slowly. And then creeping up the beach below the house, wreathing around the pines. Now this fog, it started coming from there, it started getting thicker and thicker, and it started coming closer and closer. Creeping up the beach means very slowly it was coming up the beach. He was at the coast. So coming up the beach, below the house, it came next to his house and wreathing around the pines. It had surrounded the pines, the trees out there as well. Now, in a few minutes, the fog would be wrapped about the house too. Now, it was so dense, it was so thick that the fog would enter the house and that would become foggy too. Then he would go into the room where Hannah, his wife, would be waiting for him with the 2 children. So he said before, it enters the house and I can see nothing, he wanted to rush to the room where his wife and his children were waiting for him. But at this moment, the door opened. Now, before he could think of it, he was just thinking that I should go there. At the same time, the door opened and she looked out, a dark blue woolen hairy over her kimono. Now there came his beautiful wife. She was dressed. Now they are talking about the Japanese dress, the Japanese clothes. Now hairy is a traditional Japanese jacket which they wear over the traditional Japanese dress. Kimono, we all are aware, the Japanese, they are always dressed in a kimono, and the jacket that they drape over it, that they wear over it, is called a hairy. So she came in dressed in that. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled and said nothing. She just came up to him very quietly with no words, and she put her arms into his arms and she just smiled and said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. Now, while he was in America, when he was studying, when he was, becoming a surgeon, he was taking the training, he had come across this girl, but he did not instantly fall in love, as in, yeah, he did like her, but he was not sure whether she was a Japanese or not. He wanted to confirm that and then move ahead. So his father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. So he knew, he was very well aware that his dad, his father, would not accept her if she wasn't a Japanese. So he made sure that she is a Japanese, and only then he moved on to have a relationship with her. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, by chance literally, at an American professor's house. Now he kept wondering, he said, just imagine if I wouldn't have met this girl, I just wonder whom I would have married. And he met her in the most casual manner. He had gone to his professor's house and she was there. She was dressed pretty casually, and it was just a very casual meeting, and he had come across her in the house. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students, and the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. Now, the professor had these foreign students. Remember, even Hannah was a Japanese, so was Sadao, and they were in States, right? They had gone to study there. So there, this professor was very kind enough, to keep his foreign students comfortable. He made sure that they were nice, because he himself was a humble person. So he wanted to do something for his foreign students, right? And of course, these kids were a little bored, but then they were happy because he was really kind to them. Sadao had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house that night. The rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble. He says, the night when he came across Hannah at the professor's house, somehow he was a little reluctant. He didn't really want to go to his house. Why? There were reasons he did not want to go. Why? Because first and foremost, the rooms were very small. Then the food was not at all tasty. It was really bad. The professor's wife was very talkative. She could keep talking on and on. But he had gone, and there he had found Hannah, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. Yes, he went there. Somehow he made it that one night where he actually met her for the first time. He met his wife for the first time. She was a new student, and he felt, when he saw her, he felt, I think it is possible, to fall in love with her. But of course, again, you remember the condition. He wanted to make sure she was a Japanese too. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him, even though they had been married years enough to have the 2 children. Now, he felt that warmth, he felt that love. When she put her hand on his arm, he still felt that they were really, deeply in love with each other in spite of the years gone by, in spite of the fact that now they had 2 children already, but still the love was going strong. For they had not married heedlessly in America. They had not just married. You see, there are certain relations where it just happens for the sake of it. But here, they had carefully thought over the whole thing and then moved into a relationship. So yes, it was a very meaningful relationship. They had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan. And when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way, although Sadao and Hana had talked everything over beforehand. So when they finished schooling there, when they finished what they had gone for, they completed all that, they returned back to Japan, they came home, and then the father met this girl. He was okay with it. They got married in the old Japanese way. The father was a little orthodox, so he wanted to make sure first the girl was a Japanese. Second, he wanted to get married in that same traditional method. And these people had already spoken. They both were fine with whatever happened. They were ready to adjust. They were perfectly happy. She laid her cheek against his arm. She rested her cheeks on his arm. They were, recalling sort of that love that was really going strong, the strong bond that they both shared. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. Can you see that? It's a very foggy picture and you can see something black. Now they were standing in the veranda, they were standing in their balcony. From there, from that misty thing that was across, they could see something black coming. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean. Flung. It seemed to his feet by a breaker. Now it was like he had been thrown out of the ocean, and that is how it seemed. He was on his feet and it was by a breaker. What do you mean by a breaker? Waves crashing on the shore. So as the waves came, they brought him out. He staggered a few steps, as in he was very unsteady. Obviously, when you have swam in that ocean and you are lost, you're hurt. It was a very rocky area. He must have got hurt, so he couldn't balance himself. He was walking very in an imbalanced manner. His body outlined against the mist. Can you see? You can literally see only the outline of the body because it was foggy. His arms above his head. That means, just like how a prisoner does. So he was literally that way, in that position. Then the curled mist hid him again. Now the mist, which was, going round and round, it was encircling. Now that mist again hid him also. It became so thick that even he got covered and now they could not see him. "Who is that?" Hannah cried. She dropped Sadao's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. They were shocked. They felt there is a man over there. And she quickly took out her arm. Remember, she was with her arm in his. So she removed it immediately and she suddenly saw that and she screamed, "Who is that?" They went, nearly to the end of the balcony to see. Because of the fog, they couldn't see. So obviously they wanted to have a clearer picture. Now they saw him again. Then they waited, and then the mist was going round and round. So somewhere in between again they saw him. The man was on his hands and knees. Now, which first he was walking, then he had fallen on his hands and knees, and he was literally crawling. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. Then what happened when he was on his knees and he couldn't make it, and so he just fell with his face over there. He fell on his face. A fisherman, perhaps, Sadao said, washed from his boat. He thought maybe because there are villages around here, so there are many fishermen, the villages of the fishermen. So probably it was one of those fishermen who had been washed from his boat. That means maybe the boat has turned and he has fallen off his boat, and so now he has come to the land, he has come to the shore. He ran quickly down the steps, and behind him Hannah came, her wide sleeves flying. Quickly he ran. Come on, now you see someone hurt, and moreover he was a doctor. So obviously he wouldn't wait for anything. And anybody, for that matter, anybody would have gone and helped him. So he ran quickly down. His wife followed him, and her wide sleeves, that the kimono and the jacket that they wear, it had big sleeves, those big sleeves. So as she was running, those sleeves were flying. A mile or two away, on either side, there were fishing villages. But here was only the bare and lonely coast, dangerous with rocks. Now on either side, on both the sides of his place, there were fishing villages, there were people. But exactly there where he was, the coast that, Sadao's house was, it was bare. Bare as in, there were no landmarks. It was absolutely an empty coast. And it was a very lonely coast. There was absolutely nobody there. It was dangerous with rocks. That's the reason it was empty, because over there ahead there were a lot of rocks. So it was very dangerous to be there. The surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. The surf as in the part of the sea near the shore. Now it was spiked as in there were rocks, there were corners of rocks. There are spikes out there. It was very rocky. So anybody who would go there would definitely, get cut and it would bleed. So somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. He said somehow. Now obviously, because Sada was aware that there are rocks over there, so whoever comes from there is definitely going to be hurt. Right? So he understood. He managed to come through them. He said this man has somehow managed to cross over those rocks, and he must be badly torn. Those rocks are so pokey, so pointed, that I'm sure he is very badly wounded. Severely wounded means extremely badly hurt. They saw when they came towards him that indeed it was so. When they went near him, they went towards him, they saw, okay, now he's badly wounded. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. Now he was on the sand, right? So one side of his sand where he was lying was already red with blood. His blood, he was bleeding so badly that already they could see the blood stains. He is wounded, Sadao exclaimed. He made haste to the man who lay motionless, his face in the sand. Now he screamed, he said, yes, this man is wounded, he is hurt, he is bleeding, because he saw the blood on the sand. He made haste to the man, he went fast towards the man who lay motionless. There was no movement. This man was there with his face in the sand, and he was just there. There was no movement. An old cap stuck to his head, soaked with sea water. He was wearing a very old cap. It was stuck on his head. That cap had not come out. Yes, and it was extremely wet. Obviously, he had come from the sea, so it was totally wet. He was in wet rags of garments. He was in totally torn clothes. Now, you remember those rocks were pointed. So, obviously, when he was trying to fight those rocks, his clothes must have torn. His skin has torn, literally. So obviously the clothes were supposed to tear. Sadao stopped Hannah at his side and turned the man's head. They turned him. They turned the man's head. They saw the face. A white man, Hannah whispered. What do you mean by a white man? Yes, an American. Remember, they were Japanese. And you remember the World War II? You remember the Axis and the Allies? Yes. Now, join those points. Connect those points. Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away and there was his wet yellow hair, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut, and upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. Now they're describing the condition of this man. They're describing how his face was, right? When the wet cap, it came off, right? He had wet yellow hair which were long enough, like it seemed he had not had a haircut since a long time, right? And his young and tortured face. Now he was a very young boy. He was a very young man, and his tortured face, as in here, obviously it was injured. It was hurt because of the rocks. And he had a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. He was totally unconscious. Obviously, he had, hurt himself so badly. There was a lot of bleeding already. So he was not at all conscious. He didn't know what they would do for him. He was totally unaware. Now Sadao remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers, he began to search for it. Now, first, they took some time to understand that, okay, now he is an American, right? He saw him totally. And suddenly he remembered, oh my God, this man is bleeding. Where am I stuck, saying that it's a white man? So as being a doctor, being that thing of a doctor, that spirit of a doctor, he really remembered that, oh God, this man is wounded. Let me see from where is the blood coming out. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. The moment he touched that person's body, the blood was coming out. It was fresh. On the right side of his lower back, Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. Now, at the lower back, on the right side of his lower back, somewhere behind, he had seen that he had a gun wound, and that wound had reopened. He was not hurt now, it was there, and because of the rocks, it must have reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder. Sometime, not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended. This wound was such that it was the flesh was blackened with powder. It had that gunpowder probably all around, and this man had been shot a few days ago. But the terrible thing was that he had not been treated for it. It was just lying there. Nothing had been done to it. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound. Now that wound was already there, and the rock he must have hit the rock again. That same part of the wound had again opened up. So that was a very bad condition of the person. Oh, how he is bleeding, Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. Now she got a little, she was very, come on, when you see someone like this, immediately you have that, affection for that person, that concern for that person. So she very sincerely said, oh my God, he is bleeding. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of the day, no one came by. Now, fortunately, what happened? Now, where they were, again the mist had surrounded, that fog, the thick fog had actually surrounded them. They covered them up totally. And at that point of the time, generally at that point of time, no one really came by over there. It was a very quiet place. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. Now the time was such that the fishermen had gone home, and the beachcombers, the people walking around the beach, who generally, maybe must have been walking there, even they had headed home because it was the end of the day. What shall we do with this man? Sadao muttered. Now he was in a fix. He was confused. He was just wondering, what should I do with this man? But his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could to stanch the fearful bleeding. Now remember, I told you that spirit of a doctor was very much enthusiastic. Now obviously when you have a patient in front of you who's bleeding, you can't just sit and watch and think, oh, what should I do with that man? You have to work immediately. You have to take action. So what happened? His trained hands, that means already he was a surgeon, right? He had got the training. And his hands immediately, just out of free will, just instantly he got that thing that, okay, I should take care of it, and to stanch the fearful bleeding, as in to stop the flow. His hand immediately rushed to that wound that, look, I need to do something to stop, the bleeding, otherwise this man will die. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. Now what? He needed something, but you remember they had nothing around him. They had just run to save him. So he had to put something to stop the bleeding. So what he did was, he packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. Now the moss that was around the sea, the thick thing, it was wet. So he just took that and he scattered that moss which was around. He took that and he put it on his wound, at least so that the blood stops coming out. The blood stops flowing out. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. Now, it's a very miserable condition of that man. It's a very bad condition. It is a very painful condition. The man moaned with pain. Now, that thing was badly hurting him. But remember, he was unconscious, right? But still, when Sadao put that, moss over it, he, actually tried to stop the bleeding. This man cried in pain, but yet he was unconscious. He did not awaken, right? In his stupor was in his unconsciousness. He was totally unconscious, and so he did not wake up. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadao said, answering himself. Now remember, he had asked himself a question, what do I do with this man? So one thought came to him after he put that. One thought came to him that all that I can do is just put him back in the sea. Probably that's the best way out. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Now, he removed all the dust from his hands, right? The bleeding had stopped. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be best, Hannah said steadily. Now here, she says, of course, I think we better just do that. She was very firm. She was very sure about it, I think that's the best way out. Undoubtedly, let's put him back into the sea. But she continued to stare down at the motionless man. Now, while she was telling her husband this, her eyes were at the man. She was looking at the man who was there motionless. He knew nothing where he was, in what condition he was. He was not at all aware. If we sheltered, now why were they thinking so much? Why were they thinking that why they should not save him? Let's get to know. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested. And if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sadao said. Now, what was the reason? Here it is. Now, if they sheltered, that means if they let him come to their house and stay and they look after him, then what would happen? Remember, he was a white man. They were Japanese, World War II. They were enemies, the enemy. So he was it. Now, they said we would be arrested for sure. I mean, obviously, we would be caught by the police that you people are giving shelter to the enemy. And if they gave him back, because as a prisoner, he was a prisoner of war. So if they gave him back, he would certainly die. So, both the ways it was like, they were in a fix. They were confused. What should we do? The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea. Hannah said. She says, I think the best thing that we can do is now both the sides we are in a fix, so just let us just put him back into the sea. But neither of them moved. Now, they both were saying that. They both were like, okay, we should put him back into the sea. But both of them did not move. They kept saying it, but their heart was not allowing them. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert figure. They both were looking at it with curious repulsion, with hate upon the still figure. They looked at it with hate because obviously he was enemy. They did not really, that's the reason they were thinking, they were having a doubt that what should we do. So they kept staring at him with that hate. What is he? Hannah whispered. He says, what is he? What is he doing? Like, who exactly is he? There is something about him that looks American, Sadao said. He took up the battered cap. He says, obviously now from the looks we can make out he's an American. So what he did was he took the battered cap. The battered cap was totally torn, damaged cap, right? Yes, there almost gone was the faint lettering. Now there was something on that cap. A sailor, he said, from an American warship. He spelt it out, U.S. Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. Do you see? Now they finally got to identify. They got to know who he actually was. He was a sailor from an American warship. He spelt it out, U.S. Navy. Now that was written on his cap. The man was a prisoner of war. The person that had held captive as consequences of a war. Right? He had been held as a prisoner because of the war. They used to take prisoners. They used to, take the enemies and they used to keep them as prisoners. Now, this is what they had done. So, he was from the US Navy, basically. He has escaped. Now, he has escaped because he was held as a prisoner. He has somehow managed to escape from there. Hannah cried softly, and that is why he is wounded. He says now he has tried to escape. So obviously, they have tried to shoot him, and that's the reason he has just, jumped into the sea and he has swam across. So he is badly hurt. In the back, Sadao agreed. Yes, in the back he has been hurt. They hesitated, looking at each other. They were, they paused without saying something. They were looking at each other that now what should they do? They were confused. He as a doctor, the concern, and they had humanity in their heart. They were like, he was a human after all. Then Hannah said with resolution, come, are we able to put him back into the sea? She said with a very firm decision. She said, okay, we have to take quick action. Are you ready to put him back into the sea? If I am able, are you? Now they're both confused. He says, okay, if I agree, are you ready to do the same? He's asking his wife. No. Immediately Hannah answered, no. But if you can do it alone. She says, look, I don't have the courage to put him back into the sea. Can you do this alone? Sadao hesitated again. Now, again, he was in a fix. He was in a dilemma. The strange thing is, he said that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. He says if the man was absolutely okay, he was uninjured, he was perfectly fit and fine, what I would have done is I would have handed him over to the police without any problems, without any hesitation. I care nothing for him. Obviously, he's our enemy. I don't care about him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy. And he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is? But since he is wounded, says, come on, he's very purely my enemy. I definitely don't care about him. I mean, you can just see he's just a very common man. But the moment you see his face, how foolish it is. But the problem was he is wounded. He was hurt. He was injured. So now that, concern was coming. You also cannot throw him back to the sea, Hannah said. She said, in this condition, do you think we will be able to put him back into the sea? Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him to the house. Now, there was no option left. They had absolutely no option left. They says all that we can do is now put him back, bring him to our house. But the servants, Sadao inquired. He says, now, okay, we both are fine with the fact that, we are taking an enemy home. We'll take care of him. We'll, heal his wounds. We'll look after his wounds. But what about the servants? If the servants come to know that we have an enemy at home, we must simply tell them that we intend to give him to the police, as indeed we must, Sadao. She says, what we are going to tell the servants is that, yeah, we have brought him, he's hurt, but we are definitely going to, as soon as he's fine, we will hand him over to the police. And she told him, this is exactly what we should be doing. So, as indeed we must think of the children and your position. She says, try and understand, we have children at home. You are a very famous surgeon, you are a doctor. We have to think of everything. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner of war. She's saying we all are going to be in that risky situation. If we don't hand him over, because he's a prisoner of war, we will have to hand him over to the police. Certainly, Sadao agreed. I would not think of doing anything else. He says, I totally understand. You are perfectly right. We will all be at a very big risk. So yes, even I agree. I would not think of doing anything apart from what you are saying. I will do exactly what you are saying. Thus agreed, together they lifted the man. Now they got a solution. They finally decided what to do. So they both lifted the man. He was very light, like a fowl that had been half starved for a long time, until it is only feathers and skeleton. Now here it was like when they lifted him up, they carried him, both of them. He was very light in weight. Light in weight like a fowl. It is like a domesticated bird. When you don't feed that bird for days together, all that you left is the skeleton and the feathers. So they are comparing this man's body to that. So his arms hanging, they carried him up the steps and into the side door of the house. They carried him up the steps and they went into the side door. This door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. There was another bedroom in their house which was empty. It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death it had not been used. So fortunately they had an empty room in their house, and so they took him there. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. They put him, now the floor had mats, nice thick mats, so they put the man over there. Everything there had been Japanese to please the old man, who would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. Now you remember Sadao's father, how he was. He was totally, that full patriotic feeling, totally Japanese. So everything what was Japanese, according to him, only those things were visible in his house. He would not even sit on a chair or on a foreign bed. He was on the floor. So it was a very thickly matted floor. Hannah went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. You know what is a quilt, right? We all use quilts to sleep. It is a fabric bedspread. It is either knitted or it was a fabric. Generally, we use fabric these days. So yeah, she went to the wall cupboards. There are cupboards in the wall, right? She took out a quilt from there. She hesitated. She took it out first, and then she was thinking, should I? She was in two minds. The quilt was covered with flowered silk and the lining was pure white silk. Now there were beautiful flowers embroidered on that pure white silk quilt. So, and that man was bleeding. So she was just thinking, should I, take it? Should I use it for this man? She sort of gave it a thought. He is so dirty, she murmured in distress. He says, oh my God. She said something in a very low tone, she said with total anxiety sort of, she said, oh my God, he's so dirty. So that quilt is in her hands, that should I, shouldn't I? Yes, he had better be washed, Sadao agreed. Now, he was in the sand. Now, when we come from the beach, what is the situation? You know, our feet especially, we have all sand until we go and wash our feet, and then you have all the sand over there. So this is how this man was totally sleeping on the beach. So top to bottom, he was full of sand. So he was in a very dirty position. He was not at all clean. So Sadao said, okay, I think first thing is we need to wash this man. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. He's telling his wife that if you can get me some hot water, I will give him a bath. I will wash him. I cannot bear for you to touch him, she said. She said, look, I don't want you to touch him. We shall have to tell the servants he is here. Now, they were trying to hide this from the servants. Now, but because he had to be cleaned, so Hannah did not want her husband to do it. She said, wait, you don't do it. I have to tell the servants that we've brought this man here and let them clean him. Let them give him a bath. I will tell Yumi now. Yumi, you remember, the nanny of Sadao's children? Yes. So she said, I will call her. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. Sadao considered a moment. Let it be so, he agreed. You tell Yumi and I will tell the others. He says, okay, fine. Let's go for it. He thought of it for a moment and he said, okay, let it be so. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. Now, he was a doctor, you remember. So, he wanted to now looking at that utter pallor means the complete unhealthy appearance. He was in a very bad shape. So, what he did was he was in that complete, total unhealthy appearance. So he looked at him and first he bent over him. He stooped down, he bent down to check his pulse. He said, first, let me check, is the man alive or dead? It was faint, but it was there. His pulse was very faint. It was very weak. It was not very strong. Like generally when you get to know the pulse, you can feel it. But his was very weak. But it was there. He was not dead. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The heart too was yet alive. He tried feeling his heart. He says, is his heart yet pumping? Is it there? Is he alive? He checked that also. But yes, he was confirmed that he was alive. He will die unless he is operated upon. He says, if I don't operate upon this man will die. Sadao said, considering, the question is whether he will not die anyway. He says, I mean, in every situation, this man is going to die. Hannah cried out in fear, don't try to save him. What if he should live? She says, now, if you save him, what will happen if he continues to live? Now, will we hand him over to the police? Will we be arrested? What will happen? What if he should die? Sadao replied, she says, why do you say that? What if he should die? What about it? He stood gazing down on the motionless man. Again, he was staring at that man who had no movement. This man must have extraordinary vitality or he would have been dead by now. Now, looking at that man from the doctor's viewpoint, he said this man has tremendous power of life. He is a very healthy man. Otherwise, the condition that he has come in, any other person would have died by now. But this man is still alive. He is yet breathing. But then he was very young, perhaps not yet 25. He was extremely young man. He was not even 25. You mean die from the operation? Hannah asked. She said, you think he's going to die from the operation? Yes, Sadao said. Hannah considered this doubtfully, and when she did not answer, Sadao turned away. She did not know what to speak next. So Sadao just turned away. At any rate, something must be done with him, he said, and first he must be washed. He says, okay, fine. We have to do something. But before we do anything, let's give him a wash. I cannot understand otherwise because of the sand all around him. How do I treat him? He went quickly out of the room and Hannah came behind him. She did not wish to be left alone with the white man. She was scared. She said, I don't want to be with this white man. So as soon as her husband left the room, she left with him. He was the first she had seen since she left America, and now he seemed to have nothing to do with those whom she had known there. Now, after she had left America, you remember she was also studying there. So once she had left from there, she had not come across any American. She had not seen a white man after that. After that, now he was the first one she had come across, right? And she had nothing to do with those whom she had known there. She had not maintained any relationship with the Americans whom she had known over there. Here he was her enemy, a menace, living or dead. Now he was something that is likely to cause harm. Now remember, if they were taking care of him or if they were leaving him, both the ways they were sort of at risk, they were in trouble. So here he was sort of an enemy, whether living or dead. Definitely the work of an enemy. She turned to the nursery and called, Yumi. She turned to the room, which was where the children were. So the nanny, the Yumi, was there with the children. So she turned towards that direction and she called her out. But the children heard her voice and she had to go in for a moment and smile at them and play with the baby boy, now nearly 3 months old. Now, the children heard their mother's voice, right? So immediately they looked for her. So what she did is she went in for a moment. She did not want the children to get scared of anything. So she went in for a moment, she smiled, she behaved very normally with them, and she began to play with her son, who was just 3 months old. Now you are looking at the situation around. Over the baby's soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth, Yumi, come with me. Now as she took the baby, she over the baby's soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth. Very quickly, very softly, she told Yumi that you come with me. I will put the baby to bed. Yumi replied, he is ready. She says, you don't worry, you come with me, I'll put him to sleep. He's just about to sleep, I'll take care of it. She went with Yumi into the bedroom next to the nursery and stood with the boy in her arms, while Yumi spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Now they were quickly trying to put the baby to sleep. He was nearly sleepy. So obviously Hannah had the baby in her arms, and Yumi went into the bedroom next to the nursery and she spread the quilt. She put it in a manner so that she could put the baby to sleep. Then Hannah led the way quickly and softly to the kitchen. Now very quickly, she took Yumi from there and she went towards the kitchen. The two servants were frightened at what their master had just told them. Now the two servants were shocked. They were literally shocked. They said, an American in our house? They were very frightened. The old gardener, who was also a house servant, pulled the few hairs on his upper lip. Now he was a little bit worried. He was a gardener cum servant in their house. So he was a little worried. He was sort of, he showed reaction. The master ought not to heal the wound of this white man, he said bluntly to Hannah. He says, look, I don't think our master, Sadao, should actually treat this man very, bluntly, in a very forthright manner. He says, don't do it. He shouldn't do it. The white man ought to die. First, he was shot. Then the sea caught him and wounded him with her rocks. If the master heals what the gun did and what the sea did, they will take revenge on us. Now, this gardener, what does he tell Hannah? He says, look, this man needs to die for the reason that what happened is, first he was shot. That means he was shot by the army, right? And then he was caught in the rocks. He was hurt by the rocks. So basically that's the country of Japan. Now, if we oppose that, if we actually treat him, we take care of him, these people will become our enemies. They are going to literally, punish us. They will definitely take revenge on us if we have gone against them. I will tell him what you say, Hannah replied courteously. She says, okay, I understand what you're telling. And she said that in a very polite manner. She told him that, okay, fine, I will go and tell Sadao what you are saying. But she herself was also frightened. Although she was not superstitious as the old man was. Now, somewhere even she was scared. You remember, this was the first thought that came actually, to both Sadao and Hannah, that what should they do? He's a white man. Should we treat him? We will be at risk. So already these things were going on in their mind. But of course, she was not superstitious. She did not believe in superstitions, just as the gardener did. Could it ever be well to help an enemy? You think, would it do good to help an enemy? Nevertheless, she told Yumi to fetch the hot water and bring it to the room where the white man was. She says, irrespective, TK, I understand what you are telling me, but still, please get us hot water and bring it to the room where the white man is. She went ahead and slid back the partitions. She went ahead and she opened the doors. The partitions there were the doors. So she quickly opened those doors. Sadao was not yet there. Sadao had not yet come back. You remember, he had left from that room. He had not yet come back. Yumi, following, put down her wooden bucket. Now there they use these wooden buckets, right? So she followed Hannah and she put it there. Then she went over to the white man. Now when she went to see him closely. When she saw him, her thick lips folded themselves into stubbornness. The moment she saw his face, she decided, I am not going to wash him. I am not going to clean him. Total stubbornness she went into. She would not change her mind. She was sure of it. I have never washed a white man, she said, and I will not wash so dirty a one now. She says, look, first and foremost, she's telling Hannah that I have never washed a white man. Secondly, just look at him. He's filled with dirt. I'm sorry, it's not possible for me. Hannah cried at her severely. Very strictly, very, as the owner, as the master, she said, you will do what your master commands you. She says, look, you are a servant, I am the master, and I order you, I command you to clean him. That was so fierce a look of resistance upon Yumi's round, dull face that Hannah felt unreasonably afraid. Now when she, very boldly, very loudly, and she, with that masterly command she gave her, that no, you better do what I am telling you. What happened? There was a fierce look of resistance. That female was like, I'm not going to accept this. Upon Yumi's face, the nanny's face, she says, no ways. And Hannah felt unreasonably, without any logic, without any reason, she just started feeling afraid. But after all, if the servants should report something that was not as it happened, very well, she said with dignity. She was afraid. Now, if she would do some more, shouting at Yumi, she was afraid. What if she would go and report something else outside? So, she quickly calmed down. She cooled down. She said with dignity, she said with absolute pride, she says, okay, fine. You understand. She tries to explain her. You understand, we only want to bring him to his senses so that we can turn him over as a prisoner. She says, see, we are not going to risk ourselves. Don't worry. She's trying to console her. She's trying to, make her do things. So she's telling her, don't worry. What we are doing is, we are just trying to bring him back to his senses. Let him just get up. Let him be conscious. And then we will hand him over as a prisoner. I will have nothing to do with it, Yumi said. I am a poor person and it is not my business. She says, see, whatever your plans are, she tells Hannah, I don't care. I am a poor person. I have nothing to do what you people have planned. And I am definitely, not really going to care about this. Then please, Hannah said gently, return to your own work. Now, she said it gently. She did not shout there. She said, I think if I force her more, there will be more trouble. So she said, okay. She calmed down. She says, okay, fine. I will handle this. You go and you do your own work. At once, Yumi left the room. She just left from there. But this left Hannah with the white man alone. Now again, she was alone. Sadao had not yet returned. She might have been too afraid to stay had not her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. Now remember, even earlier when she was there, when Sadao walked out, she ran after him. She said, I don't want to be alone with this white man. But at that point of time, when Yumi left the room, she might have been too afraid. Here Hannah was saying, it was Hannah, she was afraid to stay. Had not her anger, you remember she was very angry at Yumi. Yes, so that anger actually supported her to stay there. Her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. It actually supported her. She was there. She was very much with the white man, but she did not leave. She did not run. And what happened further is something very interesting to know. So stay glued, stay connected. We shall meet back in part 2.